I drove past the cemetery where my late husband is buried and saw my son's car there. He never visits his father's grave. Curious, I parked and walked between the headstones. I found him standing at a strange grave, whispering and crying. My heart almost stopped when I heard what he was saying. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The October wind cut through my cardigan as I drove past Willow Grove Cemetery, the same route I'd taken twice a week for the past 3 years. Every Tuesday and Friday, like clockwork, I brought fresh flowers to Robert's grave. My late husband deserved that much, even if our 38 years together had been more companionship than passion. The maple trees lining the cemetery's iron gates were ablaze with autumn colors, and I was mentally cataloging which chrysanthemums I'd bring on Friday when I saw it. My son's black Honda Civic, parked near the east entrance. My foot eased off the accelerator. Albert never visited his father's grave. Not on the anniversary of Robert's death, not on Father's Day, not even when I explicitly asked him to accompany me. "I say my goodbyes in my own way, Mom," he'd told me countless times, his jaw tight with something I'd always interpreted as grief too painful to revisit. Robert's plot was on the west side, near the old oak tree. The east entrance led to the newer section, plots purchased within the last decade. Why was Albert here? I pulled over, my hands trembling slightly on the steering wheel. At 63, I'd learned to trust my instincts. Something wasn't right. My son, who claimed he couldn't bear the weight of cemetery visits, was here on a random Wednesday afternoon. His car was empty, engine cold when I cautiously touched the hood after parking 2 rows back. I walked through the gates, staying close to the hedge line. The cemetery was nearly deserted except for a groundskeeper on a riding mower in the distance. My sensible walking shoes made soft sounds on the paved path as I moved deeper into the newer section, scanning the rows of headstones. Then I saw him. Albert stood before a gray granite marker, his tall frame bent forward, shoulders shaking. Even from 50 feet away, I could see he was crying. My son, who hadn't shed a tear at his father's funeral, who maintained such careful control over his emotions that his wife Nicole complained he was made of stone, was sobbing like a child. I ducked behind a large monument topped with a weeping angel. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't grief for his father. This was something else entirely. Something raw and devastating. "I'm so sorry," Albert's voice carried on the wind, broken and hoarse. "Catherine, I'm so sorry. I should have fought harder. I should have stood up to him. I should have protected you." "Catherine?" I pressed my hand against the cold stone angel, steadying myself. "Who was Catherine?" "It's been 6 months," he continued, his voice cracking. 6 months since you left this world, and I still can't breathe right. Nicole thinks I'm working late. Mom thinks I'm at the gym. Nobody knows I come here twice a week, talking to a piece of granite like it can bring you back." My mind raced. 6 months ago was April. Albert had been distracted that spring, I remembered. Distant. Nicole had mentioned he'd been stressed about work, but I'd sensed something deeper. A mother knows. "Your father destroyed us." The bitterness in Albert's voice made me flinch. Franklin Stone, with his money and his threats and his perfect future son-in-law all picked out. He made sure I was nothing, remember? Just some poor kid with big dreams and empty pockets. Not good enough for his daughter. Not worthy of the Stone name. Stone. The name hit me like a physical blow. Franklin Stone owned half of Millbrook County. The textile mills, the shopping centers, the new hospital wing. He sat on every board, chaired every committee, had dinner with senators and governors. And his daughter. "I heard about the funeral," Albert whispered. "I wanted to come, but how could I? Your husband was there. Richard Bradford. The man your father chose for you. The man you married instead of me. Everyone said what a devoted husband he was, standing there in his $1,000 suit, accepting condolences. Did they know? Did anyone know how miserable you were?" I crept closer, moving from monument to monument like a spy in some absurd thriller. But this was real. This was my son, grieving a woman I'd never heard him mention, speaking of a past I knew nothing about. Albert dropped to his knees in the grass, and I heard him sob. "I met him. Your son. I saw him at the funeral from across the street. Catherine, he has your eyes. Your beautiful eyes. And he's 5 years old. Exactly the age he'd be if... His voice broke completely. The world tilted. A 5-year-old son. The timeline crashed through my mind with brutal clarity. Albert had dated someone seriously about 6 years ago, before Nicole. He'd been devastated when it ended. Locked himself in his apartment for weeks. Lost 15 pounds. When he finally emerged, he refused to discuss it. Said only that it wasn't meant to be, and that we should never bring it up again. Within a year, he'd married Nicole, a perfectly suitable girl from a perfectly suitable family. A marriage that looked right on paper but had always felt hollow to me. They won't let me near him, Albert said, his voice hardening. Franklin made sure of that. Even with you gone, even with Richard Bradford acting like the grieving widower, your father controls everything. He's got custody of my son, Catherine, our son. And I can't do a thing about it because I have no proof. No legal standing, nothing but this hole in my chest where my heart used to be. A sound escaped my throat. Half gasp, half cry. Albert's head snapped up. For a terrible moment, our eyes met across the rows of graves. His face went white, then red, then white again. Mom? I stepped out from behind the monument, my legs barely supporting me. Albert, I was bringing flowers to your father and I saw your car. How long have you been standing there? His voice was sharp, defensive. Nothing like the broken whisper of moments before. Long enough. My voice surprised me with its steadiness. Long enough to know you have a son. My grandson. Long enough to know that Catherine has been dead for 6 months. Long enough to know Franklin Stone took something precious from you. Albert's face crumpled. He looked suddenly young, like the boy he'd been at 20, before life had taught him to hide everything behind a wall of careful composure. Don't, he said. Please, Mom. Just don't. But I couldn't stop. 20 years as a librarian had trained me to gather information, to piece together stories from fragments. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you fight for him? With what? The desperation in his voice cut through me. Franklin Stone threatened to destroy me if I came near Catherine. He had investigators follow me. He made sure I lost my job at Patterson Engineering. He warned every company in 3 counties not to hire me. That's why I work in Hartford now, 60 miles away, the only place beyond his reach. And Catherine, she begged me to leave her alone, Mom. She said her father would make both our lives miserable, that she'd married Richard Bradford for security, for peace. She said the baby was Richard's, even though I knew. But now she's gone, I said softly. And your son, Timothy. His voice broke on the name. She named him Timothy. Richard Bradford is raising him as his own. Franklin Stone is grooming him to be the next heir to the family empire. And I'm nobody. Just a mechanical engineer with no proof of paternity, no money for lawyers who could stand up to Stone's legal team, and a wife who doesn't even know this child exists. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying speed. Nicole doesn't know? How could I tell her? We were already engaged when I found out Catherine had a baby. I saw the announcement in the paper. Richard and Catherine Bradford welcomed their son Timothy. The dates. God, Mom. The dates lined up perfectly with when Catherine and I were together. But she'd married Richard 4 months into the pregnancy. Quick, quiet ceremony. The society pages said it was an intimate family affair. I moved closer, my hand reaching for my son. Albert, if this child is yours... If? He laughed bitterly. I know he's mine. I feel it here. He pressed his fist against his chest. But feeling isn't proof. Franklin Stone made sure Richard Bradford's name is on the birth certificate. Made sure Catherine signed every document declaring Richard the father. Made sure I was erased from the picture completely. DNA testing, I said. That's scientific proof. That's undeniable. Which requires access to the child, Albert countered. Which requires filing a petition with the court. Which requires a lawyer. Which costs money I don't have. Not the kind of money needed to fight Stone's attorneys. They'd bury me in paperwork and motions and delays. And even if I somehow proved paternity, who do you think the courts would favor? A mechanical engineer making $80,000 a year, or one of the wealthiest, most powerful families in New England? The wind picked up, scattering leaves across the graves. I looked at the headstone before us. Catherine Stone, beloved daughter, loving mother, 1988-2025. Until we meet again. She'd been only 37, younger than Albert by 2 years. How did she die? Car accident. Albert's voice was hollow. Single vehicle collision on Route 47 late at night. The police report said she lost control on a curve, but Catherine was the most careful driver I ever knew. She never sped, never took risks, and that stretch of road, she'd driven it 1,000 times. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the October wind. You think it wasn't an accident? I think Catherine was miserable. I think she'd been trapped in a loveless marriage for 5 years. I think Franklin Stone controls everything and everyone in his orbit. And I think asking questions about Catherine's death would be very, very dangerous. The fear in his voice was real, palpable. This wasn't grief alone. This was terror. My son was afraid of Franklin Stone, genuinely afraid. Albert, I said carefully, if this little boy is your son, our family, we can't just abandon him. We can't let fear— It's not just fear, Mom. He grabbed my arms, his grip almost painful. Listen to me. 2 weeks after Catherine died, I received a phone call. No number, no identification. A man's voice said, Albert Ashford, you will not make inquiries about the Bradford family. You will not attempt contact with the child. You will not speak to the press. If you do, accidents happen. Careers end. Families suffer. Then he hung up. My blood ran cold. That's a threat. That's illegal. It's untraceable. And it's real. The next day, someone broke into my car. Nothing was stolen but every family photo I kept in the glove box. Photos with you, with Dad, with Nicole's parents. They were spread across the dashboard. A message. We know who matters to you. We can reach them. I thought of my small house on Maple Street, the house Robert and I had bought 40 years ago. The house where I lived alone now, where I felt safe in my routine of library shifts and garden club meetings and grocery shopping every Thursday. The illusion of safety shattered like glass. So you've done nothing, I said. For 6 months, you've grieved in secret and done nothing. What choice did I have? The anguish in his voice was unbearable. Take on Franklin Stone and risk everything. Risk you? Risk Nicole even if our marriage isn't perfect? Stone has judges in his pocket, police chiefs, state representatives. He's untouchable. No one is untouchable, I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. And that little boy, Timothy, he's family. He deserves to know his real father. He deserves better than being raised by people who threatened and manipulated his mother, who might have— I couldn't finish the sentence. Albert's eyes met mine, and I saw something shift in them. Hope, maybe, or recognition. Mom, you don't understand what you're saying. These aren't people you challenge. These are people who destroy obstacles. Then we'll be very careful, I said. We'll be smart about this. But I'm not walking away from my grandson. The groundskeeper's mower had moved closer, the sound intrusive in our bubble of secrecy. Albert looked around nervously, then pulled me away from Catherine's grave, toward a more isolated area behind a maintenance shed. If we do this, he said, his voice low and urgent, we can't tell Nicole. Not yet. She'd never understand. She'd think I cheated on her, or worse, that I've been lying to her our whole marriage. Haven't you been? The question came out harsher than I intended. Yes. His honesty was brutal. But if she finds out before we have a plan, before we have something concrete, she'll leave me. And Stone could use a divorce, use family instability as ammunition to prove I'm unfit. He was right, and I hated it. So we investigate quietly. We gather information. We find proof. We'd need Catherine's medical records from the pregnancy. We'd need to establish timeline proof that she and I were together. We'd need to document that she was forced into marriage with Bradford. And then we'd need money, serious money, for lawyers who aren't afraid of Franklin Stone. One step at a time, I said, my mind already racing ahead. 20 years as a librarian had taught me research skills most people didn't appreciate. I knew how to find information, how to follow paper trails, how to be patient and thorough. First, We need to know everything about Catherine's life in the last 6 years. Who her doctors were, who her friends were, whether she left any documentation of her true feelings. Her friend Emily, Albert said suddenly. Emily Thornton. She and Catherine were close. Roommates in college. She might know something. Then we start with Emily. I pulled out my phone, making a note. What else? Think, Albert. What leverage do we have? Catherine's mother died when she was 16, he said slowly, his brow furrowed in concentration. She was never close to her father after that. She used to talk about her mother's things being stored in a locked room at the Stone estate. Personal items, journals. Franklin never let her access them. He said it was too painful, but Catherine thought what? That there were things in there he didn't want her to see. Things about the family, about her mother's death. Another suspicious death in the Stone family. The pattern was forming, ugly and clear. We need to get into that room. The estate has security, Albert said. Cameras, guards, the works. It's a fortress. Fortresses have weaknesses, I said. People have routines. Security has blind spots. There's always a way. Albert stared at me like he'd never seen me before. Mom, who are you right now? I smiled, though there was no humor in it. I'm a grandmother who just found out she has a 5-year-old grandson being raised by people who terrorize anyone who challenges them. I'm a mother who's watched her son suffer in silence for 6 years. I'm a woman who's spent her whole life being polite and careful and appropriate, and I'm tired of it. Sometimes, Albert, being nice isn't enough. He was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. Then, slowly, he nodded. Okay, but we have to be careful. If Stone finds out we're digging, then we don't let him find out, I said simply. We're quiet, we're smart, and we don't give up until Timothy knows his real father. As we walked back toward our cars, I felt something unfamiliar stirring in my chest. Purpose, determination, perhaps even a touch of righteous anger. Franklin Stone had spent years controlling lives, manipulating outcomes, crushing anyone who stood in his way. He'd never faced a 63-year-old librarian with nothing to lose and everything to fight for. The game was beginning, whether he knew it yet or not, and I intended to win. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh notebook and a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains Robert's mother had made, illuminating the list I'd been building since 5 a.m. Emily Thornton was my first priority, but finding her contact information proved harder than expected. Social media searches turned up 3 Emily Thorntons in the region, none with profiles that matched someone who'd been Catherine's college roommate. I was reaching for my phone to call Albert when it rang. Nicole's name flashed on the screen. Helen, hi. My daughter-in-law's voice was tight, artificially bright. I hope I'm not calling too early. Not at all, dear. I've been up for hours. Listen, I wanted to invite you for dinner tonight. Just family. Albert's been so distant lately, and I thought maybe having you there would help him relax. You know how he is. He won't talk to me, but sometimes he opens up around you. Guilt twisted in my stomach. Nicole had no idea why her husband was distant, and I was now complicit in his secret. Tonight might be difficult. I have a library board meeting that could run late. Tomorrow, then? There was an edge of desperation in her voice. Please, Helen. Something's wrong with Albert, and I don't know how to reach him. He disappears for hours, claims he's working, but his boss called last week looking for him. He's lying to me, and I need to know why. My hand tightened on the phone. Nicole was already suspicious, already asking questions. If she pushed too hard, if she discovered the truth before we had a strategy, everything could collapse. Let me talk to him, I said carefully. Sometimes men just need space to work through things. It's been 6 months of space, Nicole snapped. Then, more quietly, I'm sorry, I'm just worried. He's not himself. Because he's grieving a woman he loved and a son he can't claim, I thought. But I said, I'll come tomorrow. 6 o'clock? After she hung up, I stared at my notebook. The dinner was a complication, but also an opportunity. I needed to observe Albert and Nicole together, assess how much danger we were in of her discovering the truth prematurely. My phone buzzed with a text from Albert. Found Emily's number. She agreed to meet you. Today, noon, Riverside Cafe. Go alone. She's nervous. An hour later, I was parked outside the cafe, watching a slender woman with auburn hair pace near the entrance. She looked about 35, professionally dressed in navy slacks and a cream blouse, checking her phone every few seconds. When I approached, her eyes darted around the parking lot before she extended her hand. "Mrs. Ashford? Call me Helen." I shook her hand, noting the tremor in her fingers. "Thank you for meeting me." Inside, we chose a corner booth far from other patrons. Emily ordered coffee she didn't touch, her fingers twisting a paper napkin into shreds. "Albert said you know about Catherine and Timothy," she whispered. "I shouldn't be talking to you. If Franklin finds out, how would he find out?" I kept my voice calm, reassuring. "This is just two women having coffee. Franklin has people everywhere." Emily's eyes were wide with genuine fear. After Catherine died, he had investigators interview all her friends. They asked questions about her marriage, her state of mind, whether she'd been in contact with anyone from her past. It was framed as routine, gathering information for the estate, but it felt like interrogation. "Did you tell them about Albert?" "God, no." She shuddered. "Catherine made me swear never to mention his name to anyone. She said it would put him in danger. She said her father had already destroyed Albert's career once and would do worse if he knew they'd reconnected." My pulse quickened. "They reconnected? When?" Emily glanced around again, then leaned closer. "About a year before she died. It was an accident. They ran into each other at a medical conference in Boston. Albert was there for some engineering presentation. Catherine was accompanying Richard to a pharmaceutical convention. They talked for maybe 10 minutes in the hotel lobby, but it was enough. She called me that night crying, saying seeing him again had broken something open inside her. Did they meet again? Twice. Once for coffee, once for a walk in a park in Hartford, somewhere far from Millbrook where no one would recognize her. She told him the truth about Timothy. She showed him pictures. Albert wanted to fight for custody, wanted to take it to court, but Catherine begged him not to. She said Franklin would bury him in legal fees and destroy what was left of his life. She said the only way Timothy would ever be safe was if Albert stayed away. The coffee in my stomach turned acidic. Safe from what? Emily's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Catherine was terrified of her father. She never said it explicitly, but I got the impression. "Helen, I think Franklin killed her mother. I think Catherine knew or suspected, and that's why she was so afraid." The cafe suddenly felt too warm, too small. Why would he kill his own wife? Because she wanted to leave him. Catherine told me once that her mother had filed for divorce when Catherine was 15. The papers were drawn up. The settlement was negotiated. Her mother was going to take Catherine and move to California, start over. Then she got sick. Aggressive cancer, diagnosed stage 4 seemingly overnight. Dead within 3 months. Catherine said her mother had just had a full physical the month before, completely healthy. Then suddenly, terminal. You think he poisoned her? I think Franklin Stone is a man who doesn't accept losing, and I think Catherine figured that out too late. Emily's hands were shaking badly now. The night before Catherine died, she called me. It was late, maybe 11. She sounded strange, not drunk, but off somehow. She said, "Em, if anything happens to me, promise you'll make sure Timothy knows the truth about his father someday. Promise me Albert won't be erased." I thought she was being dramatic. She'd been depressed since Timothy started school, talking about how trapped she felt. I told her to get some sleep, that we'd talk in the morning, but there was no morning. By noon the next day, she was dead. The implications crashed over me like a wave. You think Franklin killed Catherine too? I think Catherine threatened to leave Richard. I think she told her father she wanted a divorce, that she was going to tell Timothy the truth about Albert. And I think Franklin solved the problem the way he always does, by eliminating it. Emily's eyes filled with tears. But I can't prove any of it. The police ruled it an accident. The autopsy showed nothing suspicious. Richard Bradford played the devastated widower perfectly. And Franklin got custody of Timothy without a single legal challenge because he'd made sure Albert Ashford legally didn't exist. "Where are Catherine's personal belongings?" I asked. "Her computer, her journals, her phone?" Franklin took everything from her house the day after the funeral. He said he was preserving it for Timothy, keeping his mother's memory safe. But Richard told people at the service that Franklin had already moved most of Catherine's things to the estate weeks before her death, like he was preparing a new secret, uglier than the last. Franklin Stone hadn't just separated Catherine and Albert. He'd potentially murdered his own wife and daughter to maintain control. And now he had Timothy, shaping a 5-year-old child in his own image. Emily, would you be willing to sign a statement about what Catherine told you? About Albert being Timothy's father? Fear flashed across her face. And make myself Franklin's next target? I have a husband, Helen. I have 2 daughters. I can't put them at risk. Then help me another way. Where would Catherine have hidden something she didn't want Franklin to find? Evidence? Documents? Proof of Timothy's paternity? Emily bit her lip, thinking. There was one place. Her mother's studio. It's in a converted carriage house on the Stone estate, separate from the main house. Catherine used to go there sometimes when her father was away on business. She said it was the only place on the property where she felt close to her mother, where she could breathe. Franklin never goes there. I think it reminds him of his wife too much. How would I get inside? You can't. The estate is locked down. There's a gate with security, cameras everywhere, patrol guards at night. You'd need access codes, keys, an invitation. It's impossible. I smiled grimly. There's always a way. Does Franklin ever leave the estate for extended periods? He's on the board of directors for 3 hospitals and 2 universities. He attends conferences, flies to board meetings. But even when he's gone, Richard Bradford lives in the main house with Timothy. And Richard's loyal to Franklin, completely under his thumb. What about household staff? Catherine must have had help with Timothy. Emily's eyes widened slightly. Mary Brightwell. She was Timothy's nanny from birth until Catherine died. Franklin dismissed her right after the funeral, said Timothy didn't need a nanny anymore, that he'd arrange for proper tutors and governesses. But Mary adored Catherine. She was more than staff. She was family. Catherine trusted her with everything. Do you know where Mary is now? She moved back to her family in Vermont, I think. Or maybe New Hampshire. I remember Catherine saying Mary came from a small town up north, somewhere rural. A new lead, but also a new obstacle. Finding a woman who'd left the state, who might not want to talk, who could also be too frightened of Franklin to help. But I had to try. I thanked Emily and walked back to my car, my mind racing through the information. As I reached for my door handle, I noticed something tucked under the windshield wiper. A plain white envelope, no markings. Inside was a single sheet of paper with typed words. Curiosity killed the cat. Some graves are best left undisturbed. This is your only warning. My hands didn't shake as I read it. Instead, a cold clarity settled over me. Someone had followed me to the cafe. Someone had watched me meet with Emily. Someone wanted me frightened enough to stop asking questions, which meant we were onto something real. I pulled out my phone and texted Albert. They know. We need to move faster. His response came 30 seconds later. Mom, please walk away. It's too dangerous. I typed back. I'm going to Vermont to find Mary Brightwell. Tell Nicole I'm visiting my college friend Ruth for a few days. Mom, no. But I was already starting the engine. 20 minutes later, I was home, throwing clothes into an overnight bag when someone pounded on my front door. Through the peephole, I saw Albert, his face flushed with anger and fear. I let him in, and he immediately grabbed my shoulders. You can't do this. That note is a direct threat. They're watching you now. If you go to Vermont, if you find Mary, they'll know. They'll hurt you to get to me, to scare us into silence. Then we'll be careful, I said, pulling away to continue packing. Albert, we have 72 hours before I'm supposed to have dinner with you and Nicole. That's 72 hours to find something, anything, that gives us leverage. After that, Nicole's going to demand answers you can't give her, and this whole thing might blow apart. Better it blows apart than you end up like Catherine. The words hung between us, stark and terrifying. But I'd already made my decision. I'm 63 years old. I've lived a careful, quiet, safe life. I raised you, supported your father, worked my library job, did everything right and proper and expected. And where has it gotten me? to a place where my only grandson is being raised by people who might be murderers, and my son is too afraid to claim his own child. Mom, no. My voice was firm, brooking no argument. You asked me who I am now? I'm someone who's done being afraid. I'm going to Vermont. I'm going to find Mary Brightwell. And I'm going to get the information we need to prove Timothy is yours. And that Franklin Stone is exactly what we think he is. A man who kills people who get in his way. Albert stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the exact instant he recognized that I couldn't be dissuaded. Then I'm coming with you. No, you need to stay here, maintain your routine, keep Nicole from getting suspicious. I need you to research everything you can find about Franklin's business dealings, his associates, anyone who might have a grudge or inside information. I need you to create a timeline of Catherine's last year. Everywhere she went, everyone she saw. Can you do that? He nodded slowly, reluctantly. What if something happens to you? Then you'll have to finish this without me. I zipped my bag closed. But nothing's going to happen. I'm just a harmless old woman visiting an old friend. Who would suspect me of anything? As I drove north on I-91 an hour later, my rearview mirror clear of any obvious tales, I replayed that question in my mind. Who would suspect me? Franklin Stone would, apparently. Because someone had left that note. Someone was already watching. Which meant the real game was just beginning. And I'd just made myself a player Franklin couldn't ignore. The only question was whether I'd underestimated how ruthless he was willing to be. I'd know the answer soon enough. The address I'd found for Mary Brightwell led me to a weathered farmhouse outside Montpelier, Vermont, 4 hours north of Millbrook. The property sat at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by pine trees turning dark in the late afternoon light. Smoke curled from the chimney, and a rusted pickup truck sat in the driveway. I'd called ahead using a number from an online directory, claiming to be a friend of Catherine's who wanted to share memories. The woman who answered had been hesitant, but ultimately agreed to meet. Mary Brightwell opened the door before I could knock. She was in her 50s, with gray-streaked brown hair pulled into a bun and eyes that had seen too much sorrow. Mrs. Ashford? Her voice was cautious. Thank you for seeing me, I said. I know this is unexpected. She studied me for a long moment, then stepped aside. Come in. Coffee's on. The farmhouse interior was modest but warm. Handmade quilts, family photos on the mantel, a wood stove radiating heat. Mary poured 2 cups of coffee and gestured to a worn sofa. You said you were Catherine's friend, but I never saw you at the house, and I knew all her friends. No point in lying. I'm Albert Ashford's mother. Catherine's, the man she loved before Richard Bradford. Mary's cup froze halfway to her lips. Then slowly she set it down. Albert. Yes. She talked about him sometimes, when Mr. Stone wasn't around. She said he was the only man she ever really loved. Her eyes narrowed. Why are you here? Because my grandson is being raised by people who terrorized his mother. Because Albert has a right to his son. And because I think Franklin Stone murdered Catherine, just like he murdered his wife. I expected shock, denial, anger. Instead, Mary simply nodded. So you know. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. You believe he killed her? I know he did. Mary's voice was flat, resigned. Catherine told me 3 days before she died. She came to my quarters at the estate. It was late, past midnight. She was terrified. She said her father had given her an ultimatum. Stay married to Richard and raise Timothy according to Franklin's vision, or lose her son entirely. He'd threatened to have her declared an unfit mother, said he had doctors who'd testify she was mentally unstable, suicidal even. He'd fabricated a history of depression, had records altered, prescriptions issued under her name for medications she'd never taken. That's fraud. That's conspiracy. That's power. Mary's hands trembled as she picked up her coffee again. Franklin Stone owns people. Judges, doctors, police chiefs. Catherine knew if she fought him in court she'd lose Timothy anyway, and probably end up institutionalized. So she made a different plan. She told me she was going to run. She'd been secretly moving money into an offshore account for months, small amounts Richard wouldn't notice. She had a friend in Canada who'd offered her a place to stay. She was going to take Timothy and disappear. My heart was racing. Did she tell Franklin? She must have. Because 2 days later, she was dead. Mary's voice cracked. The police said she lost control on a curve, but Catherine drove that road every day. She knew every turn, every pothole. And the autopsy… She stopped, pressing her lips together. What about the autopsy? It showed high levels of sedatives in her system. The police concluded she'd been taking anti-anxiety medication and it affected her driving. But Catherine didn't take medication. She was afraid of it, afraid of being drugged and controlled. I'd bet my life those pills were forced on her or slipped into her food. Did you tell the police your suspicions? Mary laughed bitterly. The chief of police plays golf with Franklin Stone twice a month. The medical examiner's office received $1 million donation from the Stone Foundation last year. Who was I going to tell? And what proof did I have except a late-night conversation and my gut feeling? But you're willing to tell me. Because you're Albert's mother. Because Timothy deserves to know his real father. And because… She stood abruptly, walking to a bookshelf in the corner. She pulled down a thick photo album and brought it back, flipping through pages until she found what she wanted. Because Catherine gave me this. She handed me a photograph. It showed Catherine holding a newborn baby, her face radiant despite obvious exhaustion. Standing beside her, his hand on her shoulder, was Albert. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same dark hair, the same shape of face, the same eyes looking at the camera with a mixture of joy and terror. When was this taken? My voice was barely a whisper. The day after Timothy was born. Richard was away on a business trip. Convenient timing arranged by Franklin, I'm sure. Albert drove down from Hartford at 3 a.m. after I called him. Catherine had asked me to. She wanted him to meet his son. Wanted proof that Timothy was his. They had maybe 4 hours together before Richard was due back. Albert held that baby like he was made of glass. Catherine cried the whole time. Then he had to leave. And Catherine had to pretend she'd spent the night alone with just me for help. I stared at the photo, memorizing every detail. This is proof. This shows Albert was there, that Catherine wanted him involved. It's proof of a visit, nothing more. It doesn't prove paternity in a legal sense. But Catherine knew that, which is why she gave me something else. Mary reached into her pocket and pulled out a small envelope. She gave me this the night she told me she was planning to run. She said, "If anything happens to me, find Albert Ashford and give him this. Tell him Timothy needs to know the truth." My hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a handwritten letter in elegant script. "Albert, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to stand up to my father 6 years ago. I'm sorry I let him bully me into marrying Richard. I'm sorry I stole 5 years of our son's life from you. Timothy is yours. He has your eyes, your smile, your gentle heart. Every time I look at him, I see the man I should have married, the life we should have had. I've attached a lock of his hair from his first haircut. If you ever need to prove paternity, this will help with DNA testing. My father is a monster. I've finally admitted that to myself. He killed my mother when she tried to leave him, and he'll kill me too if I try to take Timothy away. But I have to try. I have to save our son from becoming another Franklin Stone. If you're reading this, it means I failed. It means my father won. Please don't let him win forever. Fight for Timothy. Love him. Tell him his mother loved him more than life itself. Tell him she tried. Forever yours, Catherine." Tears blurred my vision. The envelope also contained a small plastic bag with a lock of baby-fine dark hair, carefully preserved. "DNA evidence," I whispered. "This is what we need. It's also a death warrant if Franklin finds out it exists," Mary said quietly. Catherine made me swear to keep it hidden until I could safely give it to Albert. That's why I moved back here, why I've stayed off social media, why I haven't contacted anyone from the estate. Franklin has people looking for anything Catherine might have left behind. He knows she was planning something. I think that's why he acted when he did. How did you escape his notice? I didn't, entirely. 2 weeks after I moved back here, someone broke into my house while I was at the grocery store. Nothing was stolen, but my bedroom had been searched, drawers emptied, mattress moved, closet ransacked. A message. "We know where you are. We're watching." I've kept Catherine's letter and the photo at my sister's house in New Hampshire ever since. Only brought them back today because you were coming. A new obstacle. Franklin's reach extend even to rural Vermont. We weren't safe anywhere. But we had evidence now. Real evidence that could prove paternity and potentially implicate Franklin in murder. I need to get this to Albert immediately, I said. And we need to file for a DNA test before Franklin realizes we have the hair sample. That will take a lawyer. A good one who's not afraid of the Stone name. I know. I'd been thinking about this problem since leaving Millbrook. There's a firm in Boston, Patterson and Associates. They specialize in family law and custody battles. They represented a library colleague's daughter in a difficult case last year. I'll contact them tonight. Mary walked me to the door as evening shadows lengthened across the property. Mrs. Ashford, be careful. Franklin doesn't just destroy careers and reputations. People who cross him have accidents, develop sudden illnesses, disappear. Catherine was his own daughter, and he killed her without hesitation. You're a stranger to him, which makes you even more expendable. I'm also a 63-year-old librarian, I said. Perhaps he'll underestimate me. Don't count on it. Franklin underestimates no one. She hesitated, then added, There's something else. The day before Catherine died, I overheard her on the phone. She was in the garden, thought she was alone. She was talking to someone about documents. Something about proof of what he did to Mother, and records that can't be altered. She said she'd hidden copies somewhere safe, somewhere Franklin would never think to look. I don't know what documents she meant or where she hid them, but if you can find them, they might prove he murdered his wife. The pieces were connecting with terrifying clarity. Where would Catherine hide something she didn't want found? The carriage house, Mary said immediately. Her mother's old studio. It's the only place on the estate Franklin won't enter. He can't stomach it. Too many memories, I suppose. Even guilt might affect him there. How would I get inside? You can't, not while Franklin's alive and watching. She paused, biting her lip. But there's a groundskeeper, Marcus Webb. He's worked on the estate for 30 years. He was loyal to Catherine's mother, and he hated seeing what Franklin did to Catherine. He has keys to the carriage house. If you could convince him to help, how do I find him? He lives in a cottage on the estate grounds, but he drinks at McSorley's pub in Millbrook every Friday night. 9 o'clock, regular as clockwork. He's in his 60s, gray beard, always wears a Red Sox cap. I memorized the details, already planning. It was Wednesday evening. I had 2 days to get back to Millbrook, contact the lawyers, and approach Marcus Webb before my dinner with Albert and Nicole. The drive back south felt longer than the trip up. Catherine's letter sat in my purse, the words burning through the leather. A young woman, trapped and terrified, fighting the only way she could. And now her son was in the hands of her killer, being shaped into something Catherine had died trying to prevent. I called Albert from a rest stop. I have proof, I said without preamble. Catherine's letter, a hair sample for DNA testing, and a witness who'll testify she confessed her father's threats. The relief in his voice was palpable. Mom, that's incredible. That's enough to— It's not enough yet, I interrupted. We need the documents Catherine hid. Evidence about Franklin killing his wife. That's what will destroy him completely. What will ensure he can never threaten us or Timothy again. How do we get documents from inside the estate? I'm working on that. But Albert, there's something you need to know. Catherine wrote that letter knowing she was going to die. She believed your father would kill her if she tried to take Timothy and run. She was right. The silence on the other end stretched painfully long. Finally, Albert said, his voice thick with emotion, I could have saved her. If I'd fought harder 6 years ago, if I'd refused to let Franklin intimidate me, then you'd probably be dead too, I said bluntly. Franklin Stone eliminates threats. You staying alive, staying free, that was Catherine's choice. She wanted you safe so you could eventually fight for Timothy. Don't dishonor her sacrifice by drowning in guilt. Honor it by winning. Mom, when did you become so what? So fierce? I smiled grimly at my reflection in the rest stop window. When someone threatened my family. Now listen carefully. Tomorrow morning, I'm meeting with Patterson and Associates in Boston. I need you to get me every document you have establishing your relationship with Catherine. Emails, photos, receipts from your Hartford meetings, anything. I also need you to write a detailed statement about your relationship timeline, including the conference where you reconnected. Can you do that without Nicole knowing? I'll figure it out. But Mom, even with Catherine's letter and the DNA evidence, Franklin will fight this with everything he has. The custody battle could take years. Only if we play by normal rules, I said. But I'm done playing by rules designed to protect men like Franklin Stone. We're going to hit him from every angle at once. Legal action, public pressure, and evidence of murder. We're going to destroy his reputation so completely that no judge will dare rule in his favor. That's dangerous. That makes us dangerous too, I finished. Good. Let him be afraid for once. Let him feel what Catherine felt, what you felt, what Timothy feels every day in that house. I hung up and stared at the darkening highway ahead. Somewhere in Millbrook, Franklin Stone sat in his mansion, confident in his power, certain he'd eliminated every threat to his control. He'd killed his wife and daughter, stolen his grandson's true father, destroyed Albert's career, and terrorized anyone who dared question him. But he'd made one critical mistake. He'd assumed that threats and intimidation would be enough to stop an old woman from fighting for her family. He was about to learn otherwise. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Turn back now, or your son will suffer the consequences. This is your final warning. I deleted the message and kept driving. They thought fear would stop me. They thought their threats would work. They'd underestimated how far a grandmother would go to protect her grandson. And that miscalculation was going to cost Franklin Stone everything. The offices of Patterson and Associates occupied the 15th floor of a glass tower in downtown Boston. Thursday morning, I sat across from Jennifer Patterson herself, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with steel gray hair and a reputation for taking on impossible cases. I'd laid out everything: Catherine's letter, the hair sample, Albert's testimony, Mary Brightwell's willingness to testify, and my suspicions about Franklin's involvement in 2 murders. Jennifer studied the documents spread across her conference table, her expression unreadable. Finally, she looked up. This is compelling evidence for a paternity claim. The letter, combined with DNA testing, would likely establish Albert as Timothy's biological father. However, she paused, and I braced myself. Franklin Stone is one of the most powerful men in New England. Fighting him in court will require substantial resources. My retainer alone is $50,000, and the case could easily cost $300,000 or more if it goes to trial. The number hit me like cold water. I don't have that kind of money. I assumed as much, which is why I'm going to be honest with you, Mrs. Ashford. Even with solid evidence, custody battles against wealthy, connected defendants are brutal. Franklin will hire a team of attorneys who'll drag this out for years. They'll attack Albert's character, question his stability, paint him as a deadbeat father who abandoned his child. They'll use his marriage to Nicole against him, claim he's hiding a secret child from his wife, suggesting dishonesty and instability. And Franklin has the resources to keep Timothy tied up in legal limbo until he's 18. So you're saying we can't win? I'm saying winning requires more than just being right. It requires leverage. Jennifer leaned forward, her voice dropping. You mentioned documents Catherine supposedly hid, evidence about Franklin murdering his wife. If those documents exist and you can obtain them, that changes everything. That's not just custody evidence. That's criminal evidence. That's leverage powerful enough to force Franklin to the negotiating table. But obtaining them means breaking into the Stone estate, which I cannot and will not advise you to do, Jennifer said carefully. However, if such documents were to anonymously appear, if they were to be verified and turned over to appropriate authorities, Franklin would be facing prosecution for murder. In that scenario, a custody judge would be highly unlikely to award custody to a man under criminal investigation. Timothy would likely be placed with next of kin, which would be Albert. I understood what she wasn't saying directly. How long do I have before you need a decision about representation? Take the weekend. But Mrs. Ashford, understand what you're considering. Breaking into private property is a felony. If you're caught, you could face jail time. And if Franklin realizes what you're attempting before you succeed, he won't call the police. He'll handle it his way. Catherine's car accident won't be the last unfortunate incident. As I left her office, my phone rang. Albert's name flashed on the screen. Mom, where are you? Boston. I just met with the lawyer. You need to come home right now. His voice was tight with panic. Nicole knows something's wrong. She showed up at my office an hour ago, demanding to know why I've been so distant. I tried to put her off, but she found the timeline I wrote for you. I'd left it on my home desk. I thought she was working late, but she came home early and saw it. My stomach dropped. What exactly did the timeline say? Everything. Catherine's name. The dates we were together. The conference where we reconnected. The fact that I believed Timothy was my son. Mom, Nicole thinks I've been having an affair for years. She thinks Timothy is the result of me cheating on her. She's furious and heartbroken, and she's threatening to file for divorce. This was the obstacle I'd feared, the complication that could unravel everything. Where is she now? At her mother's house. She won't answer my calls. Her mother called me a liar and a cheat and said Nicole deserves better. If she files for divorce, Franklin's lawyers will use it against me. They'll say I'm unstable, that my marriage is falling apart, that I'm an unreliable father figure. Then we need to talk to Nicole before she does something irreversible. We need to tell her the complete truth. She won't listen to me. But Mom, she might listen to you. She respects you. If you could explain, I'll be there in 2 hours. I was already heading for my car. Text me her mother's address. And Albert, prepare yourself. Once we tell Nicole everything, there's no going back. She'll either stand with us or against us. And if it's against us, this gets much harder. The drive back to Millbrook felt endless. I used the time to rehearse what I'd say to Nicole, how I'd frame Albert's choices in a way that wouldn't sound like excuses. But the truth was messy and complicated, full of compromises and secrets that couldn't be easily explained. Nicole's mother, Virginia, answered the door with a face like stone. Helen, I suppose Albert sent you to make excuses for him. I came to explain what Virginia doesn't understand yet, I said calmly. May I speak with Nicole? I don't think— Mom, let her in. Nicole appeared behind her mother, her eyes red and swollen from crying. She looked exhausted, betrayed, and furious all at once. I want to hear what possible explanation there could be for my husband having a secret child he's been obsessing over for months while lying to my face. We sat in Virginia's formal living room, the air thick with tension. Nicole clutched a crumpled tissue, her wedding ring catching the light as her hands twisted in her lap. I took a deep breath and began. I told her everything. About Catherine and Albert's relationship 6 years ago. About Franklin Stone separating them through threats and intimidation. About Catherine's forced marriage to Richard Bradford. About Albert discovering Timothy's existence only after Catherine was already married and pregnant. About the threats that had destroyed Albert's career and kept him away. About Catherine's death and the evidence suggesting murder. Nicole listened in silence, her expression shifting from anger to shock to horror as the story unfolded. When I finished, she sat frozen for a long moment. You're telling me, she said slowly, that Albert has been secretly mourning a dead woman and grieving a son he can't claim, and he never thought to tell me? His wife? He was trying to protect you, I said. Franklin Stone threatened to destroy everyone Albert cared about. By keeping you ignorant, Albert thought he was keeping you safe. Safe from what? From the truth? From having a choice about whether I wanted to be married to a man with a secret child? Nicole's voice rose. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? Finding out my husband has been visiting another woman's grave, that he has a son with someone else, that our entire marriage has been built on lies? Not lies, I said. Omissions. Painful omissions made under duress. That's a fancy way of saying lies. Nicole stood abruptly, pacing to the window. And now what? You want me to accept this? To help Albert fight for custody of a child that isn't mine? To go up against some powerful family and risk everything we've built? I want you to understand that Albert loves you, I said quietly. But he also loves his son. Those two things don't cancel each other out. Don't they? Nicole whirled around, tears streaming down her face. Because it feels like I've been competing with a ghost for 2 years. It feels like I was never really his first choice. Just the safe option after Catherine was out of reach. Tell me I'm wrong, Helen. Tell me Albert married me because he loved me, not because he was trying to forget someone else. I couldn't. The truth was written on my face, and Nicole saw it. She made a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. That's what I thought. Nicole, please, I said. Albert needs you right now. Timothy needs you. That little boy is being raised by people who murdered his mother. He deserves to know his real father, to be safe and loved. Regardless of how Albert's relationship with you began, you can choose now to be part of something important. You can help save a child. Or I can walk away from this disaster and save myself. Nicole grabbed her purse from the sofa. I need time to think. I need time to figure out if I can forgive Albert for this, if I can live with being second choice, if I can accept a stepson who'll always remind me that my husband loved someone else first and more deeply. If you walk away now, Virginia interjected coldly, you're giving up on your marriage without fighting for it. Is that the woman you want to be? Is it wrong to want a husband who's honest with me? Nicole shot back. Is it wrong to want to be someone's first priority for once? She looked at me, her expression hardening. I won't stand in Albert's way. I won't sabotage his custody case. But I won't help either. I need distance from this. From him. From all of you. She left, the front door closing with quiet finality. Virginia stood slowly, her mouth tight. You've made a mess of my daughter's life. Franklin Stone made this mess, I corrected. We're just trying to clean it up. By destroying my daughter's marriage in the process. Virginia walked to the door, holding it open. Get out of my house, Helen, and tell your son that Nicole will be staying here until she decides what to do. If he tries to contact her before she's ready, I'll make sure she files for divorce immediately and testifies against him in any custody hearing. Are we clear? Crystal clear. We'd lost a potential ally and gained an active obstacle. Nicole's testimony about Albert's secrecy and emotional distance could devastate our custody case. And if she filed for divorce, it would paint Albert as unstable and dishonest. Exactly the narrative Franklin's lawyers would exploit. I called Albert from my car. She needs time. We have to give it to her. Mom, we don't have time. Tomorrow night is dinner and now Nicole won't be there. That's going to raise questions with everyone else. And without Nicole's support, the lawyers... We'll have to work harder, I interrupted. We'll figure this out. Right now, I need you to focus on something else. Tomorrow is Friday. Marcus Webb drinks at McSorley's pub at 9 o'clock. I'm going to approach him about getting access to the carriage house. That's breaking and entering. That's illegal. So is murder, but Franklin Stone doesn't seem concerned with legality. I took a breath, steadying myself. Albert, listen to me. We're past the point of playing it safe. We have evidence for paternity, but Jennifer Patterson says it's not enough to guarantee victory against Franklin's resources. We need the documents Catherine hid. We need proof of murder that's so damning Franklin can't wiggle out of it. That means taking risks. What if you get caught? Then I get caught. But I'm an old woman who can claim confusion, early dementia, whatever story works. They won't throw me in prison. The worst that happens is I'm escorted off the property and warned not to return. But if I succeed, if I find those documents, Franklin loses everything. And if something worse happens, if Franklin decides you're too much of a threat, the question hung in the air between us. I thought of Catherine, her car on that dark road. I thought of Catherine's mother, dead from impossibly sudden cancer. I thought of the threatening notes, the break-ins, the surveillance. Then you'll finish this without me, I said quietly. You'll take what we've gathered to the authorities. You'll fight for Timothy no matter what it costs. You'll be the father Catherine knew you could be. Promise me, Albert. His voice was thick with emotion. I promise. But please, Mom, be careful. Always. I hung up and stared at the steering wheel, my hands trembling slightly. For the first time since discovering Albert at the cemetery, genuine fear crept through my determination. Franklin Stone was a killer. He'd eliminated his wife and daughter without hesitation. What would he do to a meddling grandmother who threatened to expose him? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I opened it. The message contained a single photo, my house, taken from across the street, my car in the driveway, my front door clearly visible. No words, just the image. The meaning was clear. We know where you live. We can reach you any time. A second text followed. Last chance. Walk away or face consequences. I stared at the photo, my heart pounding. They were escalating, moving from vague threats to direct intimidation. This was the moment where a reasonable person would go to the police, would step back and let authorities handle it. But authorities hadn't helped Catherine. They'd written her death off as an accident, ignored evidence, accepted Franklin's narrative. The police chief played golf with Franklin twice a month. The medical examiner's office was funded by Stone donations. There was no help coming. There was only me, Albert, and whatever courage we could muster. I texted back, "Wrong answer. See you soon." Then I blocked the number and drove home. Tomorrow night, Marcus Webb would either help me access the carriage house or I'd find another way. But one way or another, I was getting those documents. Franklin Stone had spent decades building his fortress of power, confident no one would dare challenge him. He was about to learn that the most dangerous opponent isn't always the strongest or the richest or the most connected. Sometimes, it's the one with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. And I was exactly that person. McSorley's pub was exactly the kind of working-class establishment I'd expected. Dark wood, older clientele, a jukebox playing classic rock. Friday night at 9 o'clock, I spotted Marcus Webb immediately. Gray beard, Red Sox cap, sitting alone at the end of the bar nursing a beer. I took the stool beside him and ordered a ginger ale. "Marcus Webb?" I kept my voice low. He turned slowly, his weathered face wary. "Do I know you?" "No, but I knew Catherine Bradford. Or rather, Catherine Stone." I saw recognition flicker in his eyes. "My name is Helen Ashford. I'm the grandmother of Catherine's son, Timothy." His hand tightened around his beer glass. "You should leave. Not until you hear me out." I pulled out my phone, showing him the photo of Catherine holding newborn Timothy with Albert beside her. "My son is Timothy's biological father. Franklin Stone stole that child from him, just like he stole Catherine's life." Marcus studied the photo, his jaw working. Finally, he said, "I can't help you. Franklin pays my salary, provides my cottage. I'm 3 years from retirement. I can't risk—" "Catherine is dead because of Franklin Stone." I cut him off. "And before she died, she hid documents proving he murdered his wife. Those documents are in the carriage house in her mother's studio. I need access to that building." "Then you're asking me to commit career suicide?" "I'm asking you to help me save a 5-year-old boy from being raised by his mother's killer." I leaned closer. "You knew Catherine's mother, didn't you? Mary Brightwell said you'd worked on the estate for 30 years. You were there when Elizabeth Stone got sick." Something shifted in his expression. Pain, old guilt, something buried deep. Elizabeth was a good woman, kind. She treated the staff like people, not servants. When she got sick, he trailed off, staring into his beer. "What happened, Marcus?" "She was fine one day, dying the next. Stage 4 cancer, they said. But I saw Franklin the week before the diagnosis. He was meeting with a doctor late at night in his study. Not Elizabeth's oncologist, some specialist from out of state. They were talking about dosages and undetectable methods, and terminal presentation. I thought maybe Elizabeth was already sick, that Franklin was getting a second opinion. But then, he stopped, his voice rough. Then she died exactly as they'd discussed. The doctor left the country 2 days after Elizabeth's funeral. Moved to Switzerland. I looked him up years later. He'd been stripped of his medical license for experimental treatments that killed patients. But by then, it was too late. Elizabeth was gone. Catherine was trapped with that monster. And I'd said nothing because I was a coward who valued his job more than the truth. The confession hung between us, heavy with regret. "You can't change the past," I said gently. "But you can help save Catherine's son. Help me get into that carriage house." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a key ring, sliding a single brass key across the bar. "The carriage house. Franklin never goes there, but Richard Bradford walks the grounds sometimes, especially at night. If you're going to do this, Do it tomorrow morning. Franklin's flying to New York for a board meeting at 10. Richard takes Timothy to soccer practice at 9. The estate will be mostly empty between 9:30 and noon. Will security be a problem? Gate codes change weekly. Tomorrow's code is 82741. Cameras cover the main house and gate, but the carriage house is in a blind spot. Franklin never bothered securing it because he never goes near it. Park on the service road behind the property, come in through the back garden gate. No camera there. The key works for both the garden gate and the carriage house door. I closed my hand around the key, feeling its weight. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. If Franklin finds out I helped you, I'm finished. And Mrs. Ashford? His eyes met mine, haunted. Be careful what you find in there. Catherine's mother kept journals. If they're still there, if Catherine left them for someone to find, the truth is going to be uglier than you imagine. I left the bar with the key burning in my pocket and drove home through streets that suddenly felt full of watching eyes. My house was dark, exactly as I'd left it. I checked every room, every window lock, every door, nothing disturbed. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. At midnight, I called Albert. I have access to the carriage house. Tomorrow morning, between 9:30 and noon. Mom, please, let me come with you. No. If we're both caught, Timothy loses both his father and grandmother. You need to stay visible, maintain your alibi. Go to work, be seen, make sure there's no question about where you were. I paused. And Albert, if something happens to me tomorrow, everything I've gathered is in a safe deposit box at Millbrook Savings Bank. Box 247. The key is taped under the false bottom of my jewelry box. Jennifer Patterson has instructions to access it if I don't check in by tomorrow evening. You planned for this. His voice was a mixture of fear and awe. Of course I did. Did you think I was walking into this blindly? I smiled despite the tension. I'm a librarian, Albert. We plan, we organize, we prepare for every contingency. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow, we either win or we lose, but either way, this ends. The next morning dawned gray and cold. I dressed in dark, practical clothes. Black pants, navy jacket, comfortable shoes, no jewelry, no bright colors, nothing memorable. I looked like any older woman running errands. The drive to the Stone estate took 15 minutes. The property sprawled across 50 acres of manicured grounds. The main house, a Georgian mansion visible from the road. I drove past the main entrance, continuing to the service road Marcus had mentioned. At 9:35, I parked my car behind a cluster of trees and approached the back garden gate on foot. The code worked. The gate swung open silently, and I slipped into the estate grounds, my heart hammering. The carriage house was 100 yards away, partially hidden by ornamental hedges. I walked quickly but calmly, knowing that frantic movement attracted attention. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, the carriage house was dim, dust motes dancing in shafts of light from high windows. The space had been converted into an artist's studio. Canvases stacked against walls, an easel near the window, shelves full of supplies, everything covered in years of neglect. I began searching methodically. Drawers, cabinets, storage boxes. Nothing. 30 minutes passed. I was beginning to think Catherine had removed whatever she'd hidden when my hand brushed against a loose floorboard beneath the old rug under the easel. The board lifted easily, revealing a shallow space beneath. Inside, 3 leather journals, a manila envelope, and a small metal box. I opened the first journal. Elizabeth Stone's elegant handwriting filled the pages. Franklin grows more controlling each day. He's had my lawyer followed, my bank accounts monitored. He told me yesterday that if I proceed with the divorce, I'll never see Catherine again. He has judges, he says. He can prove I'm unfit. He can make me disappear if necessary. The entries grew more desperate, more frightened. Then, I've been feeling ill, dizzy, nauseous, weak. Franklin insists it's stress, but I've never felt like this. He brings me tea every evening now, stays to make sure I drink it. There's a bitter aftertaste I can't identify. The final entry, dated 3 days before her death. I'm dying. I know it now. Franklin has poisoned me, slowly and carefully. Catherine suspects but can't prove it. I've hidden copies of my medical records from before the cancer diagnosis. All clean. I've hidden documentation of Franklin's threats, recordings of his conversations about eliminating obstacles. I've put everything here, in my studio, where he'll never look. Someday, Catherine will be brave enough to use this. Someday she'll escape him. If you're reading this, please help her. Please save my daughter from the monster I married. Tears blurred my vision. The manila envelope contained medical records, financial documents showing payments to the disgraced doctor Marcus had mentioned, and a USB drive labeled insurance. The metal box held a small recorder and 3 cassette tapes, each labeled with dates from 26 years ago. I pocketed everything, my hands shaking. That's when I heard the door open behind me. I turned slowly. Richard Bradford stood in the doorway, his expression cold. Marcus called to warn me someone might try this. He's loyal to Franklin, not to your sentiments, Mrs. Ashford. Did you really think a key and a code would be handed over without Franklin knowing? My blood turned to ice. Marcus had betrayed me. This was a trap. Step away from the journals, Richard said, moving closer. Everything you found goes back in that hiding spot. Then we're going to have a conversation about how dangerous it is to threaten the Stone family. But I was already moving, shoving the journals and envelope into my jacket, backing toward the rear window I'd noticed earlier. You can't stop this, Richard. I've already made copies. I've already given evidence to lawyers. If anything happens to me, it all goes public. You're bluffing. But there was uncertainty in his voice. Am I? Test me. Hurt me and find out what happens when a grandmother disappears after investigating her grandson's guardian. Find out how much scrutiny falls on Franklin Stone when I've already filed preliminary motions with family court, when I've already given statements to attorneys, when I've already documented everything for the police. I reached the window, unlatched it. I'm not Catherine, Richard. I'm not young or isolated or frightened. I'm a 63-year-old woman with nothing to lose and everything documented. Franklin will destroy you. Franklin is finished. I climbed through the window, dropping into the garden outside. Tell him Helen Ashford says hello. Tell him his daughter left receipts for everything he did. And tell him I'm coming for my grandson. I ran through the gardens, expecting pursuit, expecting guards, expecting something. But there was nothing. I reached my car, started the engine, and drove away from the estate, checking my rearview mirror constantly. Only when I was 5 miles away did I pull over, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. I'd done it. I had the evidence. Elizabeth Stone's journals, medical records, financial documentation, recordings. I called Albert. I have everything. Meet me at the lawyer's office in Boston. Now. Mom, are you okay? You sound... I'm fine, just hurry. But I wasn't fine. As I pulled back onto the road, I saw a black SUV in my rearview mirror. Following. Maintaining distance, but unmistakably there. They were following me to see where I'd go, what I'd do with the evidence. And I was leading them straight to Jennifer Patterson's office, potentially putting the lawyer at risk. I made a split-second decision and turned off at the next exit, heading instead toward the Millbrook police station. If Franklin's people wanted to threaten me, they could do it in front of witnesses. The SUV followed for 2 more blocks, then suddenly turned away, disappearing into traffic. They'd gotten their answer. I wasn't going to be intimidated. I was going public. I parked outside the police station and made a call. Not to Albert, but to someone else entirely. Someone I'd been keeping in reserve for exactly this moment. Detective Shaw, this is Helen Ashford. We spoke 3 days ago when I filed my initial report about threats. I'm ready to hand over the evidence I mentioned. All of it. Including proof of 2 murders committed by Franklin Stone. Because yes, I'd already filed a report with a state detective working on corruption cases. And yes, I'd already established a trail of evidence with authorities Franklin didn't control. And yes, I'd been 3 steps ahead this entire time, building a case brick by brick while Franklin's people threatened and followed and thought they were intimidating a naive old woman. That was my plot twist. That was my preparation. I'd never been stumbling blindly into danger. I'd been gathering evidence, creating paper trails, and ensuring that even if something happened to me, Franklin Stone would still fall. Sometimes the best weapon isn't strength or money or connections. Sometimes it's patience, planning, and being underestimated. And Franklin Stone had definitely underestimated me. Detective Maria Shaw met me in the lobby of the Millbrook Police Station, her expression carefully neutral. She was with the Massachusetts State Police Criminal Investigation Unit, assigned to corruption cases involving high-profile individuals. I'd found her 3 days ago through careful research, a detective with a reputation for being unbuyable, whose own father had been destroyed by a wealthy businessman who'd manipulated the legal system. She understood what it meant to fight power with limited resources. "Mrs. Ashford." She shook my hand firmly. "Let's talk somewhere private." We moved to a small conference room away from the main station. I spread Elizabeth Stone's journals, the medical records, the financial documents, and the USB drive across the table. Everything you need to prove Franklin Stone murdered his wife 26 years ago, and everything you need to question the circumstances of his daughter's death 6 months ago. Detective Shaw pulled on latex gloves and began examining the documents, her expression growing darker with each page. She read Elizabeth's journal entries aloud, her voice tight. "Franklin brings me tea every evening now. Stays to make sure I drink it. There's a bitter aftertaste I can't identify." She looked up. "This is evidence of premeditated murder, combined with the financial records showing payments to Dr. Gerald Gordon, the physician who was later stripped of his license for experimental treatments that killed patients. The same doctor who diagnosed Elizabeth with terminal cancer that appeared overnight." I pointed to another document. "And this USB drive contains recordings Elizabeth made of Franklin's threats about the divorce. His exact words, 'You'll never take Catherine from me. I'll bury you first, and no one will question it.'" Shaw plugged the USB drive into her laptop. Franklin Stone's voice filled the small room, cold and menacing, making threats that were unmistakable in their intent. When the recordings finished, Shaw sat back, her jaw tight. "This is substantial evidence. Why didn't you come forward with this immediately when you found it?" "Because I needed to ensure it couldn't be suppressed or disappeared," I said. "I've made 3 copies. One is with my attorney, Jennifer Patterson of Patterson & Associates in Boston. One is in a safe deposit box at Millbrook Savings Bank. And one is with a journalist at the Boston Globe who specializes in investigations of wealthy families. If anything happens to me, or if this evidence mysteriously vanishes from police custody, all 3 copies go public simultaneously." A slight smile crossed Shaw's face. "You've thought this through. I'm a librarian. We're trained to preserve information and create redundancies." I pulled out another folder. "I've also documented every threat I've received over the past week, including photographs of surveillance outside my home, anonymous notes warning me to stop investigating, and testimony from Mary Brightwell, Catherine Bradford's former nanny, about the circumstances of Catherine's death." "You believe Franklin Stone killed his daughter too." "I believe Catherine threatened to leave her husband and expose the truth about her son's paternity. I believe Franklin saw her as a threat to his control, just like he saw his wife as a threat. And I believe that car accident wasn't an accident." I leaned forward. "Detective Shaw, I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to reopen the investigation into Catherine's death with this new context. Look at the toxicology reports again. Question whether those sedatives were really self-administered. Interview the witnesses. Franklin's money may have silenced the first time." Shaw was quiet for a long moment, studying the evidence spread before her. Finally, she said, "I'll need to involve the district attorney's office. A case this high profile against someone with Franklin Stone's resources requires significant preparation. We'll need to verify the authenticity of these documents, get expert testimony about the recordings, potentially exhume Elizabeth Stone's body for a new autopsy. How long will that take? Months, possibly. Building a murder case against someone who committed the crime 26 years ago isn't quick or easy, and Franklin will hire the best defense attorneys money can buy. But you'll pursue it? Mrs. Ashford, if this evidence is authentic, and preliminary examination suggests it is, then Franklin Stone is a serial killer who's been protected by wealth and influence for decades. Yes, I'll pursue it. I'll pursue it until he's in prison, or I've exhausted every legal avenue." Her eyes met mine. "But I need to warn you, This will get ugly. Franklin will attack your credibility, your son's character, your family's reputation. He'll claim you manufactured evidence, that you're a vindictive woman trying to steal his grandson. The media will be brutal. Let them come, I said calmly. The truth is the truth, regardless of how many lawyers try to obscure it. We spent the next 2 hours going through every detail, with Shaw photographing documents and recording my statement. When we finished, it was past 2 o'clock. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Albert. I called him back from the parking lot. It's done. The state police have everything. Mom, thank God. I've been terrified. Nicole called me an hour ago. Franklin Stone showed up at her mother's house. He tried to talk to her, said he wanted to clear up misunderstandings about the family situation. Nicole's mother threw him out, but he left his card and said Nicole should call him if she wanted to know the real truth about Albert. A chill ran through me. Franklin was already moving, already trying to turn Nicole into a weapon against us. What did Nicole say? She called me to warn me. She said she's still angry, still processing everything, but she doesn't trust Franklin. She said any man who shows up uninvited at someone's home to manipulate a marital situation is creepy and controlling. Her words, not mine. A small victory. Nicole wasn't on our side yet, but she wasn't on Franklin's either. That's something. What about Timothy? Have you had any contact? No. But Richard Bradford called my office this morning. He said Franklin wants to arrange a meeting. Neutral ground, both families present, to discuss the situation like civilized people. He suggested next Friday at the Stone estate. Absolutely not, I said immediately. That's Franklin's territory. He controls everything there. If we meet him, it's in public, with witnesses, with our attorney present. Jennifer Patterson agreed to represent us, Albert said. I called her this morning and told her we'd found the evidence you went after. She said she'd take the case for whatever we could afford, that bringing down Franklin Stone was worth more than money. She's drafting a petition for paternity testing and filing it with family court on Monday. Things were moving fast now, pieces falling into place. But we were still vulnerable. Franklin knew we had evidence, knew we'd gone to the police. He was cornered, and cornered predators were the most dangerous. Albert, listen carefully. For the next few weeks, you don't go anywhere alone. You vary your routes to work. You install security cameras at your apartment. You document everything, every phone call, every encounter, every threat. Understand? You think he'll come after me? I think he'll try to intimidate you into dropping the paternity claim. And if intimidation doesn't work, I didn't finish the sentence. We both knew what Franklin was capable of. That evening, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea. Catherine's letter spread on the table before me. I hope you're at peace now, I whispered to the empty room. I hope you know we're fighting for Timothy, that we're not letting your father win. My doorbell rang at 7 o'clock. Through the peephole, I saw Nicole standing on my porch, alone. I opened the door cautiously. May I come in? Her voice was subdued, none of the anger from our last meeting. I stepped aside, and she entered, looking around my small house like she was seeing it for the first time. We'd had dinners here, holiday gatherings, but she'd never really looked before. Now she studied the photos on the walls, Albert as a child, Robert and me on our wedding day, family moments spanning decades. I've been thinking, Nicole said finally, sitting on my sofa, about everything you told me, about Catherine and Franklin and Albert's choices. And I realized something. I've been making this about me, about my hurt feelings, my sense of betrayal. But there's a 5-year-old boy whose mother is dead and whose real father can't claim him because of a wealthy man's threats and manipulation. Nicole, let me finish. She held up a hand. I'm still angry at Albert. I'm still hurt that he kept this secret. Our marriage has problems we need to work through, and I don't know if we'll make it. But that's separate from what's right for Timothy. That little boy deserves to know his real father. He deserves to be safe from Franklin Stone. And if I can help make that happen, I should. Relief flooded through me. What changed your mind? Franklin showed up at my mother's house. Her voice hardened. He was smooth, charming, full of concern for my difficult situation. He said Albert was unstable, that he'd been stalking the Bradford family, that his paternity claims were delusions. He offered to pay for marriage counseling. even suggested he could help Albert get the psychiatric help he clearly needs. The whole time he was smiling, but his eyes— She shuddered. His eyes were cold, empty. I've never met someone who felt so fundamentally wrong. That's because he's a killer, I said quietly. He murdered his wife and daughter, and he'll kill anyone else who threatens his control. I believe you. Nicole looked at me directly. So, what do you need from me? Testimony that Albert is stable, employed, capable of being a father. Character witness statements. Support during the custody hearing when it comes. And most importantly, stand beside him so the judge sees a complete family unit, not a man in a failing marriage. I can do that. She paused. Helen, I need you to understand something. I'm doing this because it's right. Not because Albert and I are fixed. We have serious problems. Trust issues. Communication issues. The foundation of our marriage was built on him trying to forget someone else. And that's not healthy for either of us. But you'll try? I'll try. For now. We'll see where it goes. She stood, preparing to leave. When's the court date? We don't have one yet. Jennifer Patterson is filing the paternity petition Monday. After that, it could be weeks or months before a hearing. Franklin will fight every step. File delays. Try to drag it out. Then we'll be patient. Nicole moved toward the door, then turned back. One more thing. That letter Catherine wrote. The one Albert showed me. She loved him very much. Part of me resents that. Resents competing with a ghost. But another part understands that real love doesn't just vanish because it's inconvenient or complicated. I hope someday Albert can love me that completely. But if he can't, I hope he can at least be honest about it. After she left, I sat in the growing darkness, thinking about love and sacrifice, and the complicated ways people hurt each other while trying to do what's right. Catherine had loved Albert enough to let him go. Albert had loved her enough to stay away when she asked. Nicole was learning to love them both enough to help save Timothy despite her own pain. And I loved my family enough to risk everything to protect them. The next weeks unfolded with bureaucratic slowness that belied the intensity of the conflict. Jennifer Patterson filed the paternity petition, and Franklin's lawyers immediately filed motions to dismiss. Detective Shaw opened formal investigations into both Elizabeth's and Catherine's deaths. The medical examiner's office agreed to exhume Elizabeth's remains for new toxicology testing. Media caught wind of the story. Stone family faces murder investigation ran in the Boston Globe. Prominent businessman accused in wife's death followed in regional papers. Public opinion began shifting as details emerged. The suspicious timing of Elizabeth's cancer, the payments to a disgraced doctor, the recordings of Franklin's threats. Franklin's lawyers issued statements calling it a witch hunt and a transparent attempt to steal a child through false accusations. But the evidence was too substantial to dismiss, and Franklin's reputation, once untouchable, began to crack. 2 months after I'd retrieved those journals from the carriage house, Franklin Stone was formally charged with the murder of Elizabeth Stone. The evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the financial trails, the journal entries, expert testimony about poisoning methods. His lawyers arranged bail, $5 million, but the damage was done. His board positions evaporated overnight. Business partners distanced themselves. The Stone name, once synonymous with power and respectability, became associated with murder and corruption. The paternity test came back conclusive. Albert was Timothy's biological father with 99.97% certainty. 3 months after that, in a courtroom packed with journalists and observers, a judge ruled that custody of Timothy Bradford Stone should be transferred to his biological father, Albert Ashford, pending the outcome of Franklin Stone's criminal trial. Richard Bradford, who'd been complicit in the deception but not the murders, didn't contest the ruling. He'd already filed for legal separation from the Stone family, trying to salvage what remained of his reputation. I watched from the gallery as Albert met his son for the first time in an official capacity, a supervised visit in the courthouse, with a social worker present and cameras rolling. Timothy was quiet, confused, uncertain about this stranger who claimed to be his father. But when Albert showed him the photo of Catherine holding him as a newborn, something in the little boy's eyes shifted. "That's my mama," Timothy said softly. "Yes," Albert replied, his voice thick with emotion. "And she loved you more than anything in the world. I loved her too. And I love you, Timothy. I know this is confusing and scary, but I promise I'll never let anyone hurt you again." It wasn't a dramatic reunion with instant connection. It was awkward and tentative, full of questions and uncertainty. But it was real. It was a beginning. 6 months later, Franklin Stone was convicted of first-degree murder in the death of Elizabeth Stone. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The investigation into Catherine's death remained open, with prosecutors building a case, but the evidence was more circumstantial there. It didn't matter. Franklin was finished. I stood at Catherine's grave on a cool spring morning, placing fresh flowers beside her headstone. Albert stood next to me, holding Timothy's hand. Nicole stood slightly apart, her relationship with Albert still uncertain but slowly healing. She'd moved back in with him, and they were in counseling, working through the layers of dishonesty and hurt. "Tell Mama we're okay," Timothy said, staring at the grave with the solemn intensity of a 6-year-old trying to understand death. "She knows," Albert said gently. "She's watching over you, proud of how brave you've been." We walked back to the parking lot together. An imperfect family bound by trauma and love and determination. Timothy would need therapy to process everything. Albert and Nicole would need years to rebuild trust. I would need time to recover from the months of stress and fear. But we'd won. Not perfectly, not cleanly, but completely. Franklin Stone had spent decades building an empire of power through intimidation and murder. He'd believed himself untouchable, believed that money and influence could erase any crime. He'd been wrong, because sometimes justice comes not from the powerful or the wealthy or the connected, but from ordinary people who refuse to be intimidated, from a son who grieved in secret, from a grandmother who wouldn't accept that her grandson was beyond reach, from a daughter-in-law who chose what was right over what was easy. As I drove home that afternoon, past the cemetery where this had all begun, I thought about the woman I'd been 6 months ago. Careful, quiet, polite to a fault. That woman still existed, but she'd been joined by someone stronger, someone who'd learned that sometimes kindness requires fierceness, that sometimes protecting family means fighting battles you never imagined you'd face. My small house on Maple Street welcomed me back, unchanged except for the security system I'd installed. Inside, on my kitchen table, sat a framed photo, Albert holding Timothy, both smiling tentatively at the camera. Nicole had taken it last week during a family dinner, the first truly happy moment in their painful journey toward becoming a family. Beside it sat Catherine's letter, preserved in a glass frame. Someday, when Timothy was older, he'd read his mother's words and understand the sacrifice she'd made, the love that had driven every impossible choice. And he'd know that his grandmother had fought for him, that his father had never stopped loving him, that family meant never giving up, no matter how powerful the enemy or how impossible the odds. The evening sun streamed through my lace curtains, warming the kitchen where I'd planned this entire campaign. Robert's mother's handiwork, 40 years old, still beautiful. Some things endured. Some things were worth fighting for. And some battles, against all odds, were worth winning. I made myself tea and opened a new book, content in the knowledge that Timothy was safe, that justice had prevailed, and that sometimes the most dangerous opponent really is the one with nothing to lose and everything to fight for. Franklin Stone had learned that lesson too late. And I had learned that age wasn't weakness. It was wisdom, patience, and the accumulated strength of a lifetime of love. That was enough. That was everything. Now tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching. And don't forget to check out the video on your screen right now. I'm sure it will surprise you.